control time is something everyone would want, but at the expense of unleashing unspeakable horrors on the world. Well, I'm sure there are some people who'd be willing to take that risk. I'm pretty sure Ubisoft would love to go back in time to undo everything about the Sands of Time remake. Speaking of Sands of Time, Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time is a reboot of the Prince of Persia series created by Jordan Mechner, developed by Ubisoft Montreal, who once upon a time were known for making things other than Tom Clancy and Assassin's Creed games. And now that I'm getting older and my future doesn't seem to be getting any brighter, I thought I might as well finish a game that I've bought on 3 separate occasions. On the original Xbox as a kid who did not have the skills to comprehend the game. Then many years later I got the HD trilogy on PS3 but dropped it halfway because of my ever-growing ADD. And finally I rebought the series on Steam when I saw that they were on sale, because now I am supposedly a responsible adult who only buys things at bargain prices. Anyways, enough about the game, now let's talk about the game. You play as a prince of Persia, accompanying his father to meet the Sultan of Azad. Along their journey, they pass through India, where the local vizier persuades the prince's father to attack the local Maharaja with promises of great wealth. Once inside the Maharaja's palace, the prince finds a mysterious dagger of time, only to be crushed by fallen debris.
No. I escaped with the dagger and found my father in the hourglass room. Let me tell you how.
Which allows him to control the very sands of time and evade certain death. Returning to his father and the vizier, having secured the hourglass of time, they then make their way to Azad with Farah, the daughter of the Maharaja, as their captive. At Azad, the vizier tricks the prince into activating the hourglass of time with a dagger, releasing the sands within and transforming everyone into sand monsters, with the exception of the prince, Farah, and the vizier. With the two being the only survivors, the prince and Farah must journey to the top of the Sultan's palace to stop the vizier and prevent the world from being covered by the sands. In the Sands of Time, there are 2 main gameplay sequences throughout the game: puzzle platforming and combat. Let's begin with the former. Once you finish a fight, you'll find a glowing sand column in the level, which acts as a save point and also grants to the prince brief visions into the future, which will guide you through the platforming sections. These save points are quite frequent, so you won't have to worry about losing too much progress if you do happen to get a game over. While exploring, the prince uses his acrobatic skills to run along large gaps, avoid deadly traps, and activate platforms to get to his next destination. During these platforming sections, if you happen to get stuck, you can use alternate camera views to help you understand where to go. However, if you happen to die during platforming, either from an early jump, a trap, or, like me, complete dumbassery, you can use the Dagger of Time to undo everything and continue your journey. As you may expect, the Dagger of Time is your greatest asset, as you'll be able to either rewind and or slow down time, with the rewind using the sand tanks on the left, while slowing down uses the power tanks on the right. So don't get too careless with the dagger, or you'll be left with a lot of trouble later on. After you complete a platforming section, you are thrown into a fight. In combat, the prince has a wide selection of ways in which he can fight back. You can attack, block, and parry with his sword, and once you fight the sand monsters of Azad, the prince can use his dagger to absorb the sands and use them to control time. However, these creatures aren't just mindless monsters, as they can also block and sometimes interrupt the prince's attacks as well. To overcome this, the prince must use his maneuverability in combat, such as jumping over the enemy to slam them into the ground, or jumping off walls and flying right into them. This gives a sense of free-flowing combat, which is quite satisfying as the prince jumps around and takes down his opponents. And it's also quite easy to figure out which ways can work against which enemy type. The prince can use his dagger to slow down time, allowing him to attack without worrying about the enemy blocking, though he can still be ambushed if you're not careful. Or he can stab the enemy with the dagger to freeze them and finish them off. However, he can only freeze enemies if he has any power tanks left. And if you don't feel like having to deal with the enemy, the prince can use his dagger to activate a mega freeze, which causes all enemies to stop moving and allow the prince to teleport to them and strike them down. Throughout the game, there will be small glowing sand clouds throughout the level, which can be absorbed to create more sand tanks, Once a new one has been created, the prince must absorb the sand monsters to create a new power tank which will grant him access to the Mega Freeze once more. When you take damage during combat, you'll be able to heal the prince by drinking at various water sources, and if you know where to look, you'll be taken to hidden water fountains that can increase the prince's health. Since the prince has Farah accompanying him during this, the game does become an escort mission, as you'll have to protect Farah from the enemy. However, she is able to handle herself and can be somewhat useful in combat, firing arrows from her bow to stun the enemy, allowing the prince to finish them off. Plus, the sand monsters don't really focus on her, but they will attack her, so make sure to help her when health drops. Once you do remove the threat, Farah recovers health quite quickly. Also, very rarely will she accidentally fire an arrow at the prince, or, more likely, the prince will walk into her line of sight. Overall, the game has aged quite well, but one thing I will say about this game is that during combat, you will find yourself firing against the camera, but you can get around it using the alternate camera view. For a game that's almost 20 years old at this point, it's still a very pretty game. Created on the Jade engine, the environments are pleasing to look at and also has some nice variety as well. The enemy models are also interesting, though they are quite limited, but understandable considering the generation that this game was made in. The character models are also visually pleasing, but do look rather dated in this day and age, especially in in-game cutscenes, where they look quite a lot like Sims. Then again, have you seen what the remake was supposed to look like? Also, whenever the Dagger of Time is activated, there's a slight blur filter on the screen, which is a nice touch. Overall, a very beautiful game that blew my mind as a kid and still impresses me as a man-child. As a kid, I didn't really appreciate the music and the sound design, mainly focusing on jumping around, killing monsters, and looking at the pretty scenery. But now that I'm older, I am pleasantly surprised and impressed with what I could hear. The soundscape really captures the nature of warfare and the desolation of unleashing a great evil. The sound effects are quite crisp as well, such as weapons being swung and hitting against metal or stone. And whenever the dagger is activated, a Russian soldier washes over me as I hear time rewinding or slowing down. The music is also fitting for this game, being a nice mix of Middle Eastern with elements of modern rock and Indian music. A job well done by the composer Stuart Chatwood, who happened to do all of the music for the other Prince of Persia games, as well as the Darkest Dungeon games. The voiceover was also great to listen to, as everyone does quite a nice job capturing the personality of the characters. The ones that stuck out to me are Yuri Lowenthal as the Prince and Barry Dennen as the Vizier, both who capture the voices of the archetypes they play. While I do appreciate the sound and music of this game, I will say that the mixing could be a lot better, which seems to be a common issue on PC. For example, finishing enemies off with the dagger is just way too loud, Farah's dialogue is way too soft, even when putting voices to the max and turning off 3D audio, and the cutscenes are also soft as well. But even with this issue, it wasn't so bad that it took me out of the experience. Even after 20 years, this game is still a pleasure to play, and has aged well for the most part. And even with its technical flaws, such as having to fight the camera during combat and the sound mixing, I still enjoyed my time with this game. And speaking of time, the game is not very long, at least for modern day standards, with one playthrough ranging between 7 to 8 hours, which is just the right length for this game honestly. It also gets quite cheap during sales, only costing me about $3 Australian. But since this game is also quite old, there's no DRM, so hint, hint. And now that I've finally finished this game, I can finally begin playing the others, which I will probably review in about 3 to 4 months when I finally get off my ass. Maybe longer if university starts back up then.